Okay, so once again, thank you for offering to do an interview with me for my project. And pretty much the first question is just an introduction, who you are, and if you're comfortable, how long you've been in Bristol for, what you do now and such. So yeah.
So, I'm Matt. I am 42. I've lived in Bristol or the wider surrounding area of Bristol since I was about 7. I suppose I spent my teenage years in a little kind of town on the outskirts of Bristol. Got really into music and got and I suppose started getting interested in politics and didn't like being in a kind of small suburban town. So kind of moved to Bristol, like sort of fairly central Bristol when I was 18, 19 and lived in mostly South Bristol since. And yeah, so that's a good kind of 25 years, give or take a few years. I've almost always worked in public services, so social care mostly, which I still work in. Music's always, ever since I was a teenager, always been a huge part of my life. And I don't know if music's influenced my politics or politics has influenced my music, but I think probably the first. I think music definitely influenced my politics. Is there anything I've missed from that question?
No, absolutely not. In fact, it kind of links to the next question, which was just asking about your relationship with music and probably with politics as well, considering that in your email you mentioned how they go hand in hand. So what's like your relationship? You said that you loved you pretty much love music. You believe that, well, you think that music is the reason why it's influenced your politics. So explain more about that.
Yeah, so I don't know. I started kind of listening to sort of big staging rock bands like Guns N' Roses and things like that, and that, they're not, I don't think they're kind of remotely political really, but then that kind of moved on to bands, I don't know, kind of like Rage Against the Machine, the Levelers, Manic Street Preachers, and kind of got more of a sense from them about about politics and about, I suppose, about the power of music to be a vehicle for kind of beliefs and I suppose for change really as well. And I kind of think I still think like that now as a kind of guy in my 40s, and I sometimes think, just stop being so utopian. You're not a teenager anymore, Matt. But I still really do think that, and I think like artists like Billy Bragg and things like that who have been going for decades with kind of a real social political message are still going. So yeah, and I suppose politics and music go hand in hand. For me, they usually do mostly. If I kind of get excited about an artist or a band, that piques my interest, and I think it can open up new genres for me as well. There might be a genre of music that I'm not massively into. So I think I've never been massively into hip hop, and I think it must have been about 10 years ago. I went to see Billy Bragg at the Freeze, and his supporting Billy Bragg was Akala and The Sound of Rum, which was one of Kate Tempest's previous groups. And Akala was sort of rapping about like Iraq war, rapping Shakespeare, and it was just, I was like, wow, it really opened up my eyes to kind of conscious hip hop and things like that. Really, I suppose I'd been a bit naive or ignorant of it in the past. I'm kind of jumping all over the way with topics. Why? Sorry, Naomi.
No, that's absolutely fine. I also wanted to mention, literally, you don't have to like be concise. I actually like when people like talk further into the topic, go in depth, because it also brings me idea, like how you explain how without different types of music, different genres, different music. It also gives you an insight of what politics, what kind of issues are arising. So like in my case, I didn't know much about police brutality when I was young until I started listening to hip hop with my dad and such, and just hearing all these types of issues that's happening in like America or in UK. And it's pretty cool how like reading back on, remembering your email, it makes sense why politics and music can go hand in hand, because it is also a way to bring awareness on things. And I'm glad that you talk about this in detail, because it gives me more resources, more topics that I can delve into, and I can be like, oh, that's probably makes sense. That makes sense why this happened. So yeah,
it's interesting you say that about kind of that police brutality in hip hop. Like I remember sort of when I was probably like early teens, stroke 11, 12, and like this big furore about NWA, like they're like from the media, like this is a dangerous band, no, don't listen to them, blah, blah, blah. I think at that time, I remember me and my mates sat in the park with a kind of sort of tape player playing NWA, and we were kind of listening to it because I suppose all the adults were saying don't listen to it. But looking back now, it's obvious why kind of media and kind of people didn't want young people to listen to it, because it was highlighting exactly that. It was highlighting police brutality, it was highlighting racism. And I think that's, I think particularly these days, political artists don't seem to be as popular, or they don't get signed to the big labels because there's so much power in the media. Whereas before, I don't know, like what's a good example? I don't know. Well, like Rage Against the Machine, really political, major label, really successful. They're going to still be really successful because they've got that kind of sort of following, I guess. But I don't see as many sort of new, fiercely political artists or groups having the same sort of success. It's all that kind of like middle of the road content. It might be the same musically, but actually lyrically in the message it's different for me. That's kind of my perception. I might be way out because I probably don't keep up as much with new stuff, but and just looking at the question about relationship music. So I have been in bands before and played quite a lot, and I've always tried to include sort of socio-political stuff in the bands I've been in. I've never been a massive kind of songwriter as such lyrically. I've done a little bit of it, and that's always kind of been political. But whether that be at, talking about stuff between songs, sneaking in a few lyrics, or, like one thing that I think is great from that, certainly when I was in it, that like the underground kind of punk scene, was that kind of solidarity with kind of social and political change. So, benefit gigs and that whole kind of DIY culture, and that, kind of everything's got to be fair. It's got to be fair for bands, it's got to be fair for promoters, it's got to be fair for the people going to the gig. So I think that manifests itself quite a lot in me, and kind of that felt very comfortable and proper for me when I was kind of involved in music.
I got a question with the what do you mean by like making it fair for like the promoters and the musicians and the what did you mean? Did you call it benefit?
Oh, sorry, yeah. So I suppose separate, like benefit gigs were separate, the kind of DIY thing. So I don't know, you might do a gig for Medicine Sans Frontières or something like that, to raise money for that, or kind of more local issues. So kind of bands would play for free, it'd be kind of a bit of a night, or I don't know, sort of like Stop the War Coalition gigs when Iraq was kicking off. There's lots of bands doing gigs and nights to kind of raise money for coaches to go to London and all those sorts of things. And then the DIY thing was kind of around do it yourself. So the promoter would book a band, and the idea being that the promoter would cover their costs and maybe a little bit more. Every band would get paid. You know, if a band had travelled, you know, the promoter would guarantee that they'd feed them. And because kind of no one was making any big money out of it, it kept the prices down for people who wanted to pay to go and see the gig. So yeah, that's what I mean. Like that kind of like being fair and equal, that kind of came very much out of that. And that was, yeah, I don't know if it's still the case. I assume it is, but certainly when I was involved in music, it was really, you know, it's kind of, if someone wasn't known as a kind of DIY promoter, a lot of bands would be like, oh no, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to do that. There was a really, there used to be a really awful thing that happened. It might still go on, that promoters would book a band and it'd be say £6 to get in, and each band would be given their own flyer for the night, and for every person who paid £6 to get in and used one of your flyers, you'd get paid £1. So I don't know, 10 people might pay £6 and give in, show one of your flyers, and you'd get a tenner, and the venue would pocket £50. It was just like, no, you know, it's that kind of whole thing about musicians being exploited and how it kind of fits with that whole wider thing. Yeah, so there's that. And I think, like, in the question about going to music events, I definitely prefer those sorts of events as well. I always feel really uncomfortable going to, you know, I don't know, a big corporate venue to watch a band, even if I love them, even if I really, really like them. I kind of feel like I'm, yeah,
like those mainstream like kind of concerts, like in Colston Hall, the O2 and such like that. Mm-hmm. You'd prefer something more underground and like more niche, right?
Yeah, definitely. But then I suppose you run the risk then of kind of sounding a bit like, oh, I only like small bands, and it's not like that at all. I think if there was a big venue that wasn't sponsored by a mobile phone person and was a decent size and didn't let too many people in so everyone could enjoy it, but it was still a good size. I don't think it's necessarily the size of it that matters to me. It's that corporate thing.
I think pretty much this is what I've noticed with most of my interviews. Usually when we have a topic, when I put down a question, we end up going in more details and it ends up linking with the next question anyways. So the next question was kind of based on the first email you sent me in regards to like why you were interested. And it was pretty much why you believe politics go hand in hand. Since I was the only one who read the email, if you could just explain in more detail why. Well, you have explained it, but like, why do you think politics and music go hand in hand?
Yeah. I think, it's probably multi-levels. I think kind of creativity is a real good vehicle for politics. You know, I think that I think if like progressive politics like tends to be what's in music, and I think kind of progressive politics come out of creativity. So that's probably part of it. I think that certainly having kind of grown up listening to music and liking political bands, even though I'm still listening to that sort of stuff and like that stuff now, a lot of my mates who, you know, we were kind of angry teens or early 20s, you know, a lot of them now, they're not as into it, or they're not as politically active now. So I think there's certainly a connection with kind of music, politics and youth culture. So I think that's probably part of it. The fact that a lot of popular music is, you know, youth led, probably comes into it. I think a lot of my more radical friends growing up now, you know, they're kind of like quite happy with a nice company car, and you know, when they see that kind of time of their life has been, that was a lot of fun, and I was really right on. I kind of still believe all that now, but you know, you wouldn't catch me on a demonstration sort of thing. Do you know, that sort of thing? So I think youth comes into it quite a lot. And I think, you know, I think a lot of political music is angry, and music's a really good vehicle for kind of a really good outlet for anger, I guess, political anger, I suppose, or passion, I think, you know, and I think music can be a real show of resistance. Certainly if you kind of got I don't know, a band, and you're at a gig and there's a couple of hundred people there, actually that kind of collectivism and that strength in numbers, if you know, that's kind of, it's almost a start, it could almost be the start of a movement, do you know what I mean, or part of a movement. I think it's something about bringing people together with music as well, and it's, you know, I suppose it's also around creating a message, getting your message out there with, you know, a good hook or a good beat or a catchy chorus or whatever. So actually it's not kind of someone stood at a sort of parapet talking, giving a speech. It's kind of, it's amongst some amazing beats or an awesome riff, or, you know, or some banging drums or whatever, you know. So it's kind of like, I suppose I think music enhances political messages as well, you know.
It makes it rememberable, in other words. Am I saying that word correctly? Yeah,
it does. It makes it memorable, and kind of, I suppose, you know, like there's times when it can give you that sort of goosebumps sort of feeling, like, yeah, you know, that's good, or you're like kind of like, you know, that kind of real, that sort of, I did that kind of fist thing, but then, you know, that's a show of strength as well, isn't it, you know, like, so yeah, I think it's probably multifaceted, but that's just a few of the ones that I can think of. It brings people together, it's a good creative way of getting your message out there, and I think youth kind of comes into it so much as well. And I think sometimes youth comes into it so much without really knowing it, you know. I think when I was young and started getting into political music, I perhaps didn't realise at the time that I was being political. I was kind of listening to political music, I thought it was great, but I didn't perhaps realise that made me political just by doing that. It was almost like that kind of rebellion of listening to that music, you know, kind of, I don't know, I keep mentioning Rage Against the Machine because they're the ones that I kind of remember. There's loads of bands, but, you know, in your bedroom, gradually turning the volume up to Killing in the Name when you're a teenager, and, you know, like your mum hearing it downstairs, like, oh my God, he's listening. What are they singing? You won't do what you tell me. No, you know, like, that's terrible, you know. But so it's that rebellion as well. With
political music, with music that have political influence, I know I think there's a difference as well, but I can vouch for you that it's still kind of going on in the youth. When you mention certain issues, and it kind of reminded me, there are songs like, you don't hear a lot of small bands, obviously, because I listen to a lot of mainstream stuff, but it's still kind of popular to have mainstream artists bring up issues. Like, one example I can think of, it's more for the youth as well, was the LGBT rights and suicide prevention. It was from a popular band, well, not band, a bunch of artists, from a rapper called Logic and two singers called Khalid and Alyssa, and they were talking about, well, the video talks about how this guy was struggling to come out as gay to his family, and him struggling with the bullying, the segregation, all the stuff, and it was very emotional. It gave me so many goosebumps. Literally, while talking about it, the song is repeating in my head. Like, I have a certain line repeating in my head, and you just listen to that and you're like, oh wow, that's amazing. And like, in that song, it also gives you the information on the suicide prevention line, what you can do, and like, you had so many people interacting with the song, and I think that's why I still believe that songs with political like issues being like portrayed is still quite popular, especially like last year with the whole Black Lives Matter movement arising again with the unfortunate death of George Floyd. Like more Black artists came up and started talking about the issues in like UK, in America, heck, even in South Africa. I got introduced to different genres in South Africa, and I was like, wow, I didn't know these issues exist. And that's why I still believe it's still kind of like, it's still going on, the whole music being political. I guess it's now more spread out with different genres now, which is great. Would you say it's, well, I'm not saying it started in Bristol, but do you think it was like during the punk era it started to become more prominent? Because that was like around the 60s, was it?
Yeah, 60s, 70s. Yeah, I don't know, because that was kind of like before my era. I think it's the punk music that got me, I suppose, punk and sort of, yeah, punk. It was the punky stuff that got me really political. Where did it start in Bristol? Oh God, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say, but then I was too young to go to the Dugout Club. Yeah. The fact that was kind of a lot of kind of black reggae dub nights, and you know, it was where punks went to, and there was crossovers with the music, and then linking that with kind of the Bristol bus boycott and that kind of you know, black rights in Bristol, and which influenced the UK, black civil rights in the UK. I don't know, I've always, when I've read kind of books about the Dugout and all of that, I've kind of always, I don't know if it's right, but I've always kind of made links about that is very Bristol. And then for, you know, bands like Massive Attack to come out of that scene and the sound system scene and Carnival, and you know, them still being very political, and then, you know, linking that, so you've got kind of like the dub, the reggae scene, and then that seems to have kind of that music kind of graduated, that's the wrong word, but sort of evolved into drum and bass and jungle. But then also kind of there was quite a strong kind of punk scene as well, and that, you know, I think it, for Bristol, maybe that's where it started. I don't know, that would be kind of a guess. I'm sure there was kind of, before that, I'm sure there was kind of political folk music, etc., but it really does seem that Bristol has got, and always has had, when I've been growing up, a really, really good musical and political scene seems the wrong word, but movements, you know, and that's been consistently along it, and it's kind of always, it always seems to go hand in hand whenever you kind of read about it. So yeah, did it start with the Bay? Yeah, I don't know. I think punk scene was probably quite key to it, but I think that had its challenges too. I've got a friend who's older than me, and he played in a band called Vice Squad, and he talks very much about how the punk scene kind of sometimes tried to get kind of, it was infiltrated by kind of racist people in the far right, and how that kind of sometimes got quite violent, because that you know, the bands and most of the people weren't of that persuasion at all, and so I think there was struggle within. I don't know if it would be that. I don't know if it would be the same in kind of, you know, drum and bass rave culture, but certainly, I think in the 70s, I think certainly there was sort of a struggle within that music scene as well, around the punk scene, around actually, you know, we don't want the far right in our scene. This is not what we're about. This is not what punk's about. I think there will be kind of acts, political, musical acts, and certainly in the punk scene, that are kind of actively far right. But they by no, you know, they don't get anywhere near the amount of kind of attention, thankfully, that the kind of more progressive political bands get.
Yeah, and when you hear answering it, I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe punk was, well, obviously punk isn't like the whole start of political kind of music, but I feel like especially in Bristol at least, it became a huge influence to why we have like more and more music and art influenced by politics, especially during the whole underground scene in Bristol, where more people were portraying different types of issues using art, which is pretty awesome in a way that people can just remember it and like, oh, I see this. It hasn't left my mind because it's so memorable. And yeah, I would say punk would be like one of the main influence. And I see Bristol as like the rebel child during the 70s to 90s. Yeah. So yeah,
and almost still is. You know, I think it's definitely got. I think if someone said describe Bristol as a kind of musical personality, is that was it a Bob Marley song? I don't know, but that I'd probably say it's a punky reggae party. You know, and it is, because I think you could include drum and bass and jungle in that, like punky reggae party. I think that's you want to add another P in there and call it a punky political reggae party. But yeah, I think that's Bristol's identity, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Because like even now, with the questionnaire I had out that you did as well, what I've noticed that most Bristol is still seen as like drum and bass and like pretty much all the genres that it was kind of growing in like influence with, like the rave scene and the underground scene, and it's still kind of like known as those types of genres today, which is quite interesting considering that it still has such an influence now than how it did then. So yeah, this probably makes sense with the previous like exclamations you made, but I was kind of curious, why did you think rave music was outlawed? And considering your previous like comments, I'm assuming it's due to the fact there was political views that the media didn't want, what the police didn't want, and I'm assuming that's why it was an outlaw. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's weird because I've never been a massive raver, like, you know, some of my friends were. I went to the odd one, but I think rave was outlawed because it was dangerous to the political status quo. You know, it was groups of like lots of young people and lots of people with different political ideas, and you know, a lot of it, I remember kind of growing up, a lot of the raves happened with the kind of traveller movement. So I can remember kind of Castle Morton being on the telly, and it was just, you know, it's like this hundreds of thousands of people arrive on common ground and sound systems, and it's just like, wow, this is amazing. But I think that was a real threat to sort of the status quo, and a real threat to kind of Middle England and the rich, white, powerful people. And so I think they kind of really cracked down on it. And they did. It was, you know, it was really brutal. And when you think about it, all it was a group of people meeting in open space, listening to music and dancing. All right, there was probably quite a lot of drugs too, but actually, you know, all the kind of evidence is that the drugs associated with the rave scene kind of, whilst it got infiltrated in the end by kind of criminal gangs and that got dangerous, that the drugs people were taking reduced violence, something kind of majorly. And I've never really kind of been into drugs, which I think is probably why I didn't get as into rave. But yeah, I think rave was definitely outlawed because it was too powerful. It had the potential to kind of really, you know, upset the status quo. And I can remember I must have been 14, 15. I don't think I was 16 yet. And the Criminal Justice Bill, which was that got turned into the Act, Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, did it get turned into, I think. yeah, I remember going on a demonstration in London about that, and so we got a coach from Bristol, and it did turn quite nasty. You know, there was kind of small scale riots, which, you know, as a 15-year-old in London, coming from Bristol, not really been to London apart from to go to the Science Museum with my parents, you know, occasionally, that sort of thing. It was both exciting and scary at the same time. But one of the images from that I really remember, and that I was really surprised about as a kind of, I suppose, a bit of a naive teenager, was I can remember standing on the side of the road, kind of watching all this stuff going on. And I can remember there was someone sat down, leaning up against the fence. And I saw this police officer walk past this person and just, for what, excuse my language, but kick the out of them. And this person was sat down at the time, you know, and this police officer walked past. So there's no way that was justified or called for, what, you know, whatever, no way. And that really, really stayed with me, around kind of, well, why are they so scared of this? Why are they so scared of these people and us here saying we just, you know, want the right to assemble and listen to music? You know, I think that the law's like outlaws 6 people meeting in an open space, group of 6 or more people meeting in an open space, listening to a series of repetitive beats. I think that's what the law says, or something like that. It's mad, and just that kind of brutality against something just ridiculous. Yeah, so that really stuck with me. I suppose nowadays you can kind of link all those kind of things around. It's about power, isn't it? Like, and anything that questions that power, or how things are and always have been. People don't want to share that power. They don't want to share that wealth. They don't want to share that kind of control. And when things come to challenge it, they come down really hard on it. I think that's, you know, throughout time, you kind of, you know, every kind of struggle, that's part of it, I think, you know.
Yeah, it kind of sounds like it's also the fact they didn't want to change kind of the rules, change the traditions, and it does kind of sound like they just didn't want anything to change. In other words, it was just so, I guess, conservative in that way. It was just so traditional. So yeah, and especially with like punk music, relaying all the issues, stuff that aren't right, stuff that should be able to change when if you think about things in the past, it's a lot different to how we view it now. Like, there are some things that probably even happened 10 years ago that was normal then, but now we're like, actually, that doesn't sound right, that doesn't sound fair. And it's still like, we're still kind of like changing and evolving in that time. And I'm guessing during that time, during the rave scenes, where they were mentioning all these problems that weren't right, like even from like 10-20 years ago, they were I know the government was probably like, oh no, it's fine, what are you talking about? No, stop. But yeah, it's quite crazy. So let me just skip to the final questions I had in mind for you. Again, it still links with all the questions we've had with all the responses we had recently. But do you think that politics and music, as in the music scene, still go hand in hand today, compared to like the past? So
Yeah, I think it kind of has to, really, particularly with the kind of current political state of politics at the moment. You know, it's never fun when the Tories are around, and they've been around far too long. And, you know, we've had kind of over a decade of austerity. You know, kind of people are getting marginalised left, right and centre. I think there's one, and I don't know if I'm being unreasonable in saying this, perhaps I am, but kind of an observation I've had is that I think certainly a lot of political music that kind of excited me seemed to kind of come out of like working class areas and things like that. And I wonder how accessible music is now to like kind of more marginalized or kind of less well-off people. Like you know, I think a lot of bands started off with like a cheap guitar and a cheap amp and like, you know, not a lot of equipment, nowhere to practice. And I think nowadays it's such an industry now, creative kind of music, you know, or I don't know, mates of mine who were more into the dance music scene, you know, they'd have a cheap pair of decks and they'd set it up to their kind of home stereo. And I don't know, it just, I worry that it's not quite as accessible, and that might reduce the impact or reduce kind of those voices that are hurt by or affected by politics of today. It might reduce their access to that vehicle for political music. I don't know, that might be unreasonable, but
No, that absolutely makes sense. I'm not going to full on like disagree, and at the same time I'm not going to full on agree, because like nowadays, well, I don't know how to play an instrument, and I love making music, but thanks to like technology such as like digital workstations, especially free ones, I have access to making music, even though I don't know how to play a piano or play a guitar or anything. And I guess that's like the help of like changing cultures, especially the culture of technology. More kids are able to like create music. There's like forms of social medias where you can actually become famous, like YouTube or SoundCloud, where their voices are heard out, which is quite helpful. But at the same time, I can't really vouch for every young person, because it also depends on how like well off and lucky you are. As in, like, I didn't have money to get all these instruments, but I was still lucky enough to have a laptop or some sort of device to use a digital workstation to make music from scratch with a free software. And obviously I had access to the internet to upload stuff on SoundCloud, on YouTube, to like for everyone to see, which is now way more accessible for like people to like click on and such like that. So I'm neither disagreeing or agreeing. I'm just saying, I guess it's also it's really based on like how like privileged you are as well. I'm like, it's definitely more accessible, like especially nowadays where internet and having a device is way more necessary, and like there are loads more devices that are cheaper that like anyone can buy under the price of £100. So that's a smartphone, and like you can use Google and such like that. So it does depend. I feel like it is becoming more and more accessible, but it really does depend on the situation you're in.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think it's one that I kind of hadn't even thought of. But because I'm sure there's people my age and older who kind of are up with technology and that. But like the thought of, I'd be baffled to, you know, I think on my laptop I've got this GarageBand thing, and I've tried kind of recording that. It's like, whoa, I can't. It just blows my. I can't get my head around it at all. Let me pick up a guitar and play some proper chords with my fingers. Like, you know, like I tend to get that. So I think, yeah, you're probably right. There is that in terms of accessibility there. That's really probably increased it actually, rather than decreased it. I suppose for me, there's something about the kind of physical act of making music as well, and the physical act of playing music or watching music live, be that, you know, kind of a DJ or a band. There's something about, I mean, less so a DJ maybe, but certainly live acts, this, and particularly political acts, there's something about that physical, that movement that kind of goes in hand with the kind of strong political message. I think, like, for me, and I suppose a current example, that band Sleaford Mods, they've got real kind of strong political message. I've seen them live, and like I just can't get into it, because it's one bloke sort of doing the vocals and another guy stood behind a computer making the noises, and there's just no physical kind of passion that goes into it. Whereas, I don't know, sort of angry punk bands where, the singer's kind of like doing that, and then the guitarist might be kind of moving about, jumping. I don't know. There's something about giving that political message some energy from the performance as well. So that's just my
No, that's
I think there's something about that too.
No, that makes sense. It does also like depend on like obviously the level of passion they like portray. That's the blessing and curse of technology, with the curse of technology being that everything isn't as vocal, if you get what I mean, as in like with you when you mentioned the band that you went to that literally only had a singer and someone behind the computer. I guess it didn't have as much passion as like what a punk band would be, where they'll be like rocking out on the guitars and like hitting the drums in like such rage. It's sometimes some like passion and such like that. So it definitely is different, and especially with technology now where most people can just go behind a computer and see the live thing, it's definitely a lot different. And I know for sure it doesn't have the same feel. Like I unfortunately haven't been to a lot of concerts at all in my life, and I know that especially if you went to a live event, it would just feel more different. You would have a bigger impact if you were right there in front of the band, actually hearing them face to face. So that's like the curse of technology. Like not everything is as goosebumpy as if you think what I mean. So especially with live concerts, like obviously it still looks amazing because you see them live, you see all the pyrotechnics, you see all the effects and such like that, but like it's 100 times more better when you're like live in front of them, seeing this all happening in front of you. Like it's very vivid in your memory. And
but I think it will carry on in Bristol. I think Bristol's got such a strong culture around politics and music. I can't see it dying out at all.
I think it's also going to be, in my opinion, based on experience and also just the research, I can also see politics and music and like the rave scene still going strong, especially now we're in a time where politics and like the government, they're more lenient. They allow stuff like this to happen more often, as in like more people are allowed to voice their opinions and they're not being like 100% suppressed, especially compared to the past. I mean, I'm not fully sure with different countries, but in Bristol at least, it's not like heavily criminalized as in what I've seen. I did a sound assistant job last year in a rave scene before COVID, and it was crazy to think that something like this, thinking about it now, like something like this in like the 80s would probably be like barged in by the police, people would be like kicked out and such. Meanwhile, now it was like, oh, you just see police officers like, oh, hi guys, I'm just helping with a rave scene, don't mind me. And it probably wasn't like as very political, but like it still like was able to like portray their different types of style instead of it being mainstream and like focusing on the status quo. And it kind of gives me hope that politics and music will pretty much be best friends in the future. So especially with your experience, you see politics and music going together. Do you think the trio, music, politics and culture, in other words, answering my title, what you think, is it either music that's influencing politics and culture or the other way around, in other words?
So is music influencing politics and culture, or is it the other way around? I think that's such a good and interesting question to answer.
It's difficult, but like, it's just opinions.
I think I'd probably say on balance that it be politics and culture influencing music. I think particularly, the underground scenes, that kind of being a bit edgy, being on the edge. I think that couldn't happen without the kind of politics and the culture. I don't think you'd get those kind of challenging things and people feeling that they can write about, sing about, rap about those issues or movements or whatever without the culture and the politics existing. I think it's kind of like the culture. It's almost like that foundation, that culture there, and the politics has influenced the culture, and that culture breeds the music.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of how it makes sense to me. But then, I think this music. Then I think after that, I think they kind of coexist, and they push and pull in different directions at different times, maybe.
Yeah, I expected that answer when you think about it, because these types of music wouldn't have started based on these issues if it wasn't like there in the first place. And you helped me you helped me realize that it also coexists from then onwards. So music influencing politics and vice versa after the starting stage of when politics kind of influence types of political music, bringing out kind of types of lyrics where it voices out issues and such like that. So I have one more question, and then I'll let you free. So this one is it's just asking, do you think there's a difference between music influenced by politics now compared to the past? Do you think there's an increase, a decrease? Do you think anything has changed? So yeah,
I think there's definite difference. I feel like there's a decrease, but that, I'm kind of very aware that I'm not as kind of, I'm older than I was pre-2000, so I may be not as kind of in the loop, but I feel like there's a decrease. It felt like in the kind of 90s, where it felt like there was hardly any music that wasn't kind of political, and if the music wasn't political, the people behind it would be, so even if it was a band that weren't singing political, they'd have a kind of really strong political stance, in their kind of presence, as it were. But that might still be the case now, but I'm not in my teenage stroke 20s. I do wonder if, I think perhaps, I don't know whether the music that's kind of more political these days, whether the music's changed. I get the sense that a lot of the music I like, so the kind of, the punk and the kind of more hardcore rock, I don't get a sense that there's as much politics within that scene with the new kind of bands, so whether that exists in other genres where that's gone up or not, I don't know, possibly, but yeah.
that makes sense. Thinking about your answer, I can see why you think that it's kind of gone down. There's not a lot of music I've heard anyway, there's not a lot of types of genres and such where it solely focuses on the political issues, or a band focusing on the political issues. I kind of assume it's diluted in a way. So you have loads of artists, they sing about love, they sing about certain types of situations, but every now and then they will mention a political issue, hence why it doesn't seem so big nowadays. You have the popular rappers like Kendrick, who would sing about, I don't know, me being rich, or his popular one being humble and such like that. And then occasionally he would also have one or two songs in some albums where he would mention about black issues and such. So that's why I kind of assume it's diluted, and why I believe you think this is kind of decreased over time, because we rarely have any bands or genres that solely focus on political issues and such like that. So it makes sense. Yeah.
And I wonder, just thinking about kind of the conversation we had just now about technology and use of technology to kind of create music for kind of younger generations or older generations, if they can get their head around it. But thinking about how music is accessed now, and whether that is a kind of barrier to political music. So, when I was growing up buying records and CDs, you'd go to an independent record shop, there'd be people of, your peers would be in there, there'd be the slightly older people behind the thing, so you'd be going somewhere where people would with the same views in you, and you'd be people would be together in a shop. You know, there'd be flyers for gigs. You know, there might be flyers for kind of, I don't know, anarchist benefit gigs or whatever. So you pick that up and access that while you were buying your music, and you know, you were buying it from an independent record shop, even if you were buying something that was on a major label or whatever. And I think now there's hardly any independent record shops around, even though I still buy records. Like, most of my music is consumed via the likes of Spotify mainly. And you know, that's Spotify is a major corporation. And are they going to give a platform to bands that might be critical of capitalism, for example, or something like that, you know? So I think whilst there's a lot of online ways of accessing music, and that, you know, those political acts, DJs, rappers, bands, whatever, will be on those online platforms, they exist in such a bigger ocean of music. Like, how do you access it? Like, how do you access new music when it's such an ocean like that? Sometimes it's like you kind of pick something up online, it's like, awesome, that's amazing, I'm so glad I picked that out and found that. You know, but sometimes that's by chance rather than rather than going in a record shop. Or, you know, I used to get NME and Melody Maker every week, and, you know, like kind of music newspapers, and, you know, you'd read reviews, you'd read live reviews, you'd read album reviews, and you'd be like, then you'd see the adverts, I don't know, like kind of, things like flyers and posters. It's all, I don't know, it's all a lot more corporate now, and I think the way we access music restricts.
Yeah, I would agree. It's kind of harder for like smaller bands as well to kind of give out, like promote their music. When you mentioned flyers, was it kind of like a thing that you just print out and you just post everywhere for free, like no restrictions? Like with online, you have to, like, for adverts you have to pay, which obviously some bands may not even have the money to. They're literally just starting out. So it's kind of, it definitely is more restricted. It is kind of like supporting more well-off bands. It's not like really being, I guess, fully fair, if you understand what I mean. So it's pretty much the more money you have, the more likely you're going to be seen and recommended. So unfortunately.
I think it's like, it's not just about the music, is it? So, you know, a lot of, you know, I can remember people used to stand outside gigs when you leave, and, you know, and I used to do it for gigs somewhere, and, you know, you'd hand out, everyone leaving, you'd hand them like a, you know, little paper flyer for your gig, and, you know, you'd have imagery on that, and often that would be kind of political messages too, you know. I think of one we did where it's like, can't remember who did it, but it was a stencil, and it was I fought the law and I won, and just little things like that, or like little kind of, there's a Bristol street artist called Sepper, SEPR, and he was in a band called Five Knuckle, like a hardcore punk band, and he used to do really good before he kind of started doing lots of street art illustrations on flyers, and they often had a kind of social political kind of theme to them. So I think back then in like pre-2000s and kind of up a little bit in the early 2000s, politics wasn't just the music, it was the other stuff around it, you know. It was the flyers, it was the, you know, all of that as well. And you don't have that now. It's
a rare, especially out and about physically. It's now become more digital. I think that's like the massive change in culture. It's just everything's becoming more digital and online and such like that. So like recently my sister and I, we just realized there was something called NFTs, where it's digital arts where you can sell everything via cryptocurrency, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a thing. So now it's becoming such a popular use. Like it wasn't even like we already just started getting used to like digital arts and such like that, and now it's now becoming common to now start selling things via cryptocurrency. Everything is becoming digital, in other words. So it's quite interesting. I can understand why it's definitely a lot less now, considering everything's kind of like on the, it's not physical anymore. It's all kind of digital and non-tangible.
It feels like
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
It feels like big business. I don't know, maybe not cryptocurrency, but it feels like kind of big business and corporations have kind of strengthened their grip on creative industries a little bit. And then maybe that's me being less confident and not enjoying digital so much. Maybe that's why I feel like that, but that's how it feels to me.
That's fair. That's totally fair. Yeah, thank you. I've pretty much answered all the questions I've needed, and cool. Thank you for telling me all like these different types of like stories, the kind of situations why you think politics and culture goes hand in hand with music, well, mostly political anyway. And yeah, this is the end.